A half-eaten sandwich sits on the edge of the laminate countertop, crusts cut off, the way a 7-year-old likes them. In the driveway, a small red bicycle leans against a gnarled oak tree, its front wheel still spinning lazily in the wind. And at the threshold of the home, the front door stands wide open, inviting the bitter winter chill to sweep through the hallway. There is no sign of a struggle, no sound of a scream, just the rhythmic ticking of a clock in the hall, counting the seconds of a life that has just stopped. Abigail was 7. She was small for her age, with a gap-toothed smile and a habit of humming to herself when she played. On this afternoon, she was under the supposed eyes-on supervision of her parents, Thomas and Eleanor. Thomas was in the garage, just 30 feet away. Eleanor was in the laundry room. Abigail was playing in the front yard. The window of her disappearance wasn't hours. It wasn't even minutes. According to the police logs, Abigail vanished in a span of exactly 90 seconds. How does a human being, a child, simply evaporate from a safe suburban cul-de-sac in the time it takes to fold a single towel? This is the central paradox that has kept the local precinct lights burning for decades. We aren't looking at a cold case, we are looking at a void, a hole in the fabric of a small town that has refused to heal since the winter of 1984. For 40 years, the question hasn't changed. Did Abigail leave that yard on her own feet, or was she taken by something that leaves no footprints? To understand the weight of what was lost, you have to understand the town of Oak Haven in the early 80s. This was a place where the concept of stranger danger felt like a ghost story told in other, bigger cities. Here, Thomas and Eleanor knew their neighbors by their first names. They knew whose dog barked at the mailman and which porch light stayed on all night. It was a community built on the foundation of "it can't happen here." The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of distant lawnmowers. It was the picture-perfect American dream, frozen in a state of terminal innocence. But beneath that calm surface, a darkness was beginning to pool. In the weeks leading up to that December afternoon, there were whispers. A strange car seen idling near the park. A man in a tan jacket asking for directions to a house that didn't exist. Small anomalies that Eleanor and Thomas would later obsess over, replaying every memory like a film strip caught in a loop. They would spend the next 40 years dissecting the silence of that neighborhood, looking for the one sound they might have missed. In this documentary, we are stepping back into that winter chill. We are examining the original handwritten police notes, the redacted witness statements, and the evidence that the authorities were too baffled to explain. This is the timeline of a tragedy. This is the anatomy of a haunting. This is the mysterious vanishing of Abigail and the silence that followed. To the world, Abigail became a case number, a grainy face on a milk carton, a headline that eventually moved to the back pages. But to Thomas and Eleanor, she was the sound of small footsteps on the hardwood floors at 6 a.m. She was the smell of strawberry shampoo and the sticky residue of glitter glue on the dining table. Abigail wasn't a mystery back then. She was a vibrant, living force of nature who loved the world with a terrifying level of trust. That Saturday morning, the last morning, began like any other. Eleanor remembers Abigail sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by her collection of smoothed river stones. She had a dream, Abigail did. She didn't want to be an astronaut or a doctor. She told Thomas she wanted to be a librarian for animals. She had already started organizing her picture books by the color of the animals on the covers. It was a meticulous, innocent logic that only a 7-year-old could possess. She spent 2 hours that morning practicing her cursive, writing her name over and over, Abigail Rose. She had a specific routine for her afternoons. She would put on her favorite yellow cardigan, the one with the missing bottom button, and go outside to check on the trees. She believed the oak tree in the front yard was a guardian. She would talk to it. She would leave small gifts at its roots, a shiny penny, a blue marble, a dandelion. This wasn't a child who wandered. This was a child who was rooted to her home by the tiny ritual she created. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. In the years that followed, some skeptics, those who didn't know the family, suggested that perhaps Abigail was unhappy, that she was a runner. But the evidence in her bedroom told a different story. On her nightstand sat 2 tickets to the traveling Ice Capade show, scheduled for the very next evening. She had laid out her best dress. She had told her best friend Sarah that she couldn't wait to see the sparkly skaters. Abigail wasn't looking for an exit. She was looking forward to tomorrow. She was planning to stay. When Thomas looked out into the yard at 4:10 p.m., he saw her yellow cardigan near the oak tree. When he looked again at 4:12 p.m., the cardigan was there, but the girl was gone. The transition from a life full of tomorrow to a house full of never happened in the space of 2 heartbeats. And as the sun began to dip below the Oak Haven horizon, the temperature dropped. The first search parties were being formed, but they were already too late. Time is a fluid concept until it becomes an indictment.
For the investigators who would later descend on the Oak Haven cul-de-sac, the entire universe shrank down to a 10-minute window, between 4:15 p.m. and 4:25 p.m. 10 minutes. In that time, a kettle can boil, a local news segment can finish, a 7-year-old child can vanish into thin air. Thomas was in the garage, just 30 feet away, tinkering with a faulty spark plug on the lawnmower. He recalls hearing the rhythmic thump-thump of Abigail's ball against the side of the house at 4:18. He knows this because he looked at his watch, thinking it was nearly time for dinner. The sound was rhythmic, comforting, the sound of a world that was still whole. Inside, Eleanor was moving through the laundry room, the hum of the dryer muffling the outside world. At 4:22 p.m., she glanced through the kitchen window. She saw the flash of Abigail's yellow cardigan near the oak tree. She saw the girl bend down to pick a stone. Eleanor turned away to pull a basket of warm towels from the machine. It took her exactly 30 seconds. When she looked back at 4:23, the yard was a painting without its subject. The oak tree stood alone. The ball Abigail had been playing with was rolling slowly toward the gutter, as if it had just been dropped. But the driveway was empty. The street was silent. The first red flag wasn't a scream. It was the absence of one. It was the sudden, pressurized silence that follows a shock. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, her voice casual at first. "Abby, dinner's almost ready." No answer. She walked to the garage. "Tom, is she in there with you?" Thomas looked up, grease on his forehead, his heart skipping a beat at the tone of his wife's voice. They checked the backyard, the tool shed, the crawl space under the porch. By 4:28 p.m., the casual calls had turned into guttural shouts. The neighborhood was waking up to a frantic, jagged energy as doors opened and porch lights flickered on, casting long, nervous shadows across the frost-covered lawns. But here is where the documentation takes a chilling turn. While Thomas and Eleanor were scouring the perimeter of their property, something was happening just 3 houses down. A neighbor, a man who would go unnamed for nearly 30 years, was standing at his mailbox. He saw a vehicle. He saw a movement that felt wrong, a shift in the peripheral vision of the afternoon. He didn't call the police that night. He didn't tell the search parties the next morning. He carried a secret in his marrow that would remain dormant until a deathbed confession decades later changed the entire geometry of the case. The police arrived at 4:40 p.m. They treated it as a missing person case, a child who had wandered off into the nearby woods. They brought dogs, they brought floodlights. But as the lead investigator, Detective Miller, stood in the driveway looking at that red bicycle, he felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter air. He noticed something the parents hadn't, a single, small footprint in the frost near the oak tree, pointing toward the road, and next to it the heavy, deep tread of a boot that didn't belong to Thomas. By 5 p.m., Oak Haven was no longer a neighborhood. It was a crime scene, though the police hadn't started treating it like one. The first responding officers arrived with a sense of routine that would later be scrutinized for decades. In 1984, the protocols for a missing 7-year-old were dangerously antiquated. Detective Miller watched as officers walked over the very frost Eleanor had pointed out, their heavy regulation boots obliterating the faint prints near the oak tree. The first hour, the most critical window for recovery, was spent filling out paperwork on a clipboard while Thomas screamed into the cold night air.